Hi everyone, this is Paradice and welcome to the first episode of my new show, Life in Sanctuary, which is all about Diablo 3. For the first episode I'm going to talk about one of the most controversial issues on the official forums, on Reddit, on all of the fan sites, and that is Inferno mode. Specifically Inferno mode difficulty, Inferno mode exploits, classes that can't make it in Inferno. There are a lot of very unhappy people right now, and I wanted to give my perspective and thoughts on this whole topic. In the background you can see my monk playing in Act 1 of Inferno. This is a new build that I'm trying out. Previously I had been focused on a lot of damage mitigation via dodge, but this one I am trying based on as much spirit generation as possible in gear and skills and in passives, and then converting that spirit into life via transcendence. Anyway, so first of all, the exploits. At release, both the wizard and the demon hunter could use combinations of skills and passives that effectively meant they could get to the end of Inferno and ultimately kill Diablo Inferno without having the gear that the other classes needed. So this gave them a gigantic advantage. The wizard exploit was based around force armor, diamond skin, and a passive that limited the amount of damage that you could take from any one hit, in combination with deliberately keeping your health pool very low, so that the fixed amount of protection that diamond skin offered you meant that you could effectively tank any monster or combination of monsters in Inferno with a little bit of skill and practice required to actually pull all of the correct casts off in the right order and maintain them. But you could do it without having any high level gear. You in fact just wanted gear with no vitality on it. That's all you needed. While the Demon Hunter version was taking advantage of Smokescreen, which makes you invisible and able to run through monsters, together with skill runes and passives that effectively meant you could have Smokescreen up almost permanently and run through everything. So skip all of the monsters, skip the champion packs, only fight exactly the minimum that you needed to fight in order to clear the quests and get to the end. Now for both of those classes, essentially what it boiled down to was, it gave them the ability to farm items and access areas at the end of Inferno that shouldn't have been accessible yet. Blizzard is setting up Inferno as a substitute for an endgame system by making it incredibly hard and effectively a gear check at every act. They're trying to limit players' progression and make sure Inferno isn't something that you just walk through. And both of these builds really destroyed that purpose. So they have both been nerfed or unpowered to the point where this exploit is going to be no longer possible. At the same time, Blizzard have also made changes to other skills, notably the monk skills Boon of Protection, which created a shield based on player life, which they thought was too powerful. And they've made a couple of other tweaks as well. And a lot of players, especially the wizards, are really angry about these changes because, well, the argument is, I spent a whole lot of money on the auction house buying gear that didn't have vitality on it specifically for this build, and now the build's useless and my gear is useless and all of that money's gone. And I can sympathise with that to a certain extent, but the reality is these skills had to be changed for the longevity of the game, otherwise you would end up with a population of wizards, because no other class could compete. And ultimately that is a terrible model for how the endgame should look. The interesting change with the monk is that a lot of monks got angry that the Boon of Protection spell was removed, because they're saying, well, that was the only skill that allowed us to survive in Inferno. Without that, we actually just die all the time in Inferno. There is no way to survive. And the response from Blizzard on the forums via community managers like Bashiok was, actually that's okay, you're not supposed to be clearing Inferno yet. Which, although that's not particularly popular right now, I think is absolutely the right choice. If you remember before release, when Blizzard was saying, hey, Inferno is going to be really hard, like really hard, it's going to take you months to complete it, and everyone was like, sure Blizzard, it's not going to be that hard. Now it's here, and it actually is that hard, and people are angry because it's that hard. I don't have a problem with it being that hard. To be honest, if I had completed Inferno already, less than 2 weeks after the game's launch, I would be incredibly unhappy with that, because it would give me zero incentive to ever go back and farm gear for anything, because the game can be completed on its hardest settings without that. So what do? Just stop playing until PvP arrives? No, Inferno is fine at the difficulty it is. The problem that I had was that not all classes were equally gear bound, but it seems that Blizzard are incredibly proactive about stopping that, which is fine with me. The one area where I think people do have a little bit of justification in being angry is the way that Inferno is just a total brick wall of difficulty. When Blizzard were talking about the game pre-release, the impression that they got was, yeah, you'd cruise through normal, you'd have to start paying attention in Nightmare, and it would get harder and harder in Hell, and then harder again in Inferno. And that's not really what happened. The problem is that while you're playing in Nightmare and Hell, your character is still leveling up, and with each level they become more powerful. Their stats obviously increase, they get access to better gear, but in the background the calculations for hitting monsters and damage down and dodging and resistances are all affected by level. So completing Hell is actually almost inevitable if you just keep playing. You will get more experience, you'll level up, and eventually you'll be at a level where Hell difficulty is no harder than normal difficulty. The bosses just have more health and take longer. So what we're really looking at is, if you play with a level appropriate to your progression in the game, you, apart from the occasional difficulty spike with a particularly challenging pack, even in Nightmare or Hell level, the difficulty is the same, or a very, very slight difficulty curve throughout the entire game, up until Inferno Act 1, where it's suddenly a wall. People's progression just stops dead, and the impression that they've been given up until that point is that progression will happen almost linearly, so they are understandably upset by that. I don't really know what can be done to change that now. It's certainly too late to make Nightmare or Hell any more difficult, because so many players have already completed that content, and it's so closely integrated with the entire leveling system that any changes there would be very hard to do. So pretty much they are stuck at trying to balance Inferno. I think the only thing that they could do would be to change the difficulty spike in Inferno Act 1 from being right from almost the first monster you hit to it ramping up over the course of Act 1 quite steadily, and then for Act 2, 3, 4 continue the current difficulty, which is extremely high. That way players would hit a wall still, but it wouldn't be a sudden brick wall, and like the first zombie that you meet in Inferno will one-shot you if you don't have mid to late Hell gear or better. Right, so the other thing I wanted to talk about with Inferno was farmability, and I think this is probably a real flaw in Blizzard's testing. I can imagine that their testing team and their quality assurance people, when they got to Inferno and they just started dying repeatedly, they probably gave up and said, okay, this content's too hard, or it's hard enough, let's go back to an earlier difficulty. But when players have gotten to Inferno, they have said, okay, this is too hard, I'm dying all the time. However, if I persist, even through a few deaths I manage to kill the occasional champion pack or unique or whatever, I will get far more useful drops than I would get in Hell. Therefore, they just persist death after death. It's very frustrating to play that way, but eventually they will get gear, and that gear will allow them to die a little bit less. So rather than, I think Blizzard's intention was that players go back to late Hell and farm there for gear, but because the gear that drops in Act 1 of Inferno even is so much better than that, players are just persisting with the frustration of dying a lot. And the problem with that, I think, all comes back to the death penalty not being high enough. 10% durability, even with level 60 rares, is only costing about 400, 500 gold maybe to repair that 10%. So you can die 5-6 times in the course of killing a champion pack, pay 2k of gold, which is nothing by that point in the game. An individual gold drop can be over 1,000 even without much gold find. And so there is no disincentive for just continuing to corpse walk your way to killing a champion pack. I think really what they need to do, and hopefully they will do, is change the death penalty in some way. Even if they only change it at level 60, what they could do is just make repairs cost 200 times more than they do now for level 60 gear. Instead of 5 deaths costing you 2,000 or 3,000 gold to repair, make it cost 100,000 gold or 200,000 gold. That will make people take death extremely seriously in the end game, and it'll let them be smart about where they farm and not be frustrated by having to corpse farm. I think that would be a great change at this point. Other than that, I think Blizzard are doing what they have to do. It's not always popular, but when there are exploitative skills that allow players to get further in Inferno than their gear would suggest that they should be, they've got to do something about that. That is the right decision. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you see or hear, please subscribe, please leave me a comment. If you want me to talk about anything specific in the future, please mention that. And that's it from me. This is Paradice, signing off.